Namaste and welcome to the Healing Mirror podcast. My name is Soraya Saraswati, and here I'm offering discussions, global satsangs, and interviews with spiritual teachers, philanthropists, and awakened and inspirational humans. Namaste, everybody. I'm very excited about today's podcast. I have 4 amazing people in the studio with me now, and they're from the Stop Ecocide movement, which is based in Stroud, in Gloucestershire, in the UK. Although it's a global movement, I believe, but we're going to learn more about that in a moment. I have with me JoJo Mehta, George Vigeleos, Anita Rosum, and we're going to be discussing ecocide and how they are working to change the law. Now, this is a very amazing subject, and one that's close to my heart, one that is honouring our Mother Earth and the forests of the world, the rivers of the world, the oceans, and our wonderful nature. So I'm going to be starting by speaking to JoJo. Now, JoJo, I believe you and Polly Higgins, who was the initial inspiration and initiator of ecocide, have become how would you explain that, JoJo? That your role is the director, would that be correct?
Yeah, well, along with Polly Higgins, I co-founded the campaign that is now known as Stop Ecocide, and we founded a non-profit back in 2017. And I worked with Polly for about 4.5 years in the years leading up to her passing. And she had dedicated the whole last decade of her life to promoting this concept of ecocide becoming a crime. Of naming sort of mass damage and destruction to the living world, and of preventing it by creating a criminal law to outlaw that. And that was her, really her raison d'etre for the whole last decade of her life to bring that forward. And so I worked with her on that. And now Polly, we have.
I believe Polly was a lawyer herself, or a barrister. I'm not sure what you call them in the UK. And are you also in working with the law as well?
Well, my background's actually in sort of communications and entrepreneurship and campaigning. My legal training, if you like, was very hands-on apprenticeship with Polly herself. So Polly, yes, was a barrister, and she actually interrupted a courtroom career when she had this kind of epiphany moment where she realised that it wasn't just her clients that needed representation; it was the earth. She famously thought to herself, the earth is in need of a good lawyer. And she was also just reaching the point in her career where, she was being acknowledged as a good lawyer herself. And, there was clearly a kind of moment there where she asked herself this question, well, how do we create a legal duty of care for the earth? And that took her on the journey that was to last the rest of her life. And it actually had her quit the courtroom in order to research ways that we could actually protect nature, and she concluded in the end that it was criminal law that was the most useful and impactful in terms of being able to prevent damage to nature.
I read some of her life story, and she sounds like she was an amazing human being, and the legacy that she's left behind that you guys are carrying on is one of great importance.
Absolutely. She was an incredibly inspiring person. I could reel off a list of people who've sort of changed the direction of their lives after having a conversation with Polly. And what's been really amazing is that there was a lot of fear around her going. You know, how will this work continue? And actually what's happened is that a whole team of people have stepped up, of which George and Anita are key people, to actually sort of carry this forward in various levels. And our work actually has kind of, in a way, it has sort of three different aspects. It has the core legal diplomatic work at the international level of actually the advocacy taking forward this crime at the International Criminal Court. So liaising with the governments of small vulnerable states, working with law firms and international criminal lawyers to kind of take this forward. Then there's the campaign aspect, which is the sort of public facing aspect of kind of raising public awareness and gathering support for it. And then there's the other aspect, which is the movement building. And those are aspects that Anita and George can fill you in a bit more on. I tend to be more focused on the international side.
And so, Jojo, can you just tell us a little bit about which countries that perhaps you're, obviously it would be impossible to deal with every country, but you said you were targeting small states or vulnerable countries. Which countries are you working with? Can I ask that?
Yes, absolutely. We've been working specifically with small island states, which are at the front line of climate change, and obviously have, you know, one of the biggest incentives to look at ways of, you know, how can we treat nature differently. And Vanuatu in particular, which is a leading Pacific Island voice, has been working with us for 3 to 4 years now. And it was actually Vanuatu, along with the Maldives, which is another small island developing state as they're known, which stepped forward in December last year at the International Criminal Court and actually officially, in their governmental capacity, officially called for serious consideration of ecocide crime, which was a massive step forward, and kind of brought the whole conversation onto a state sort of governmental level, so that it's gone beyond now just the level of kind of advocacy or lobbying, if you like, to actually a conversation that's taking place at the state level. So that's been very exciting. And so we're kind of gradually evolving a sort of growing group of countries that potentially are interested in supporting this going forward. And it's just sort of, you know, bringing it onto that conversational level, it sort of really changes the whole global conversation. It hasn't yet got to the stage where the amendment to international law has been proposed. That's quite a big step for any country to take. But we're kind of now sort of strongly en route in that direction in a way that hasn't happened before. And the conversation at the global level is now being brought back into international forums in a way that hasn't happened for decades. So that's very exciting.
Fantastic. And we have quite a few small islands off Australia, actually, Indigenous owned islands, who are really concerned because their sea levels, of course, are rising already, and they're already having land loss. So, and unfortunately, the governments aren't doing, you know, governments that aren't doing a lot for those people yet. So I can see that this would be, you know, in the forefront of their minds. Well, thank you, Jojo. That's absolutely fantastic. It's such inspirational work. I live on the land myself, and I'm a bit of a green thumb, and I'm reforesting a patch of subtropical land here, which was mainly grass when I came, and hopefully there won't be much grass left. We'll be bringing back all the native wildlife here, and it's such a wonderful thing to put your hands into, but to ensure that this is, you know, that the land is going to be protected on a global level is absolutely fantastic. So I'm all for what you guys are doing, and it's such important work. I might pass over to Anita now, and Anita, I'll just mute you there, Joe. Anita, I'd love to hear a little bit more about your role with the Stop Ecocide movement and how you're implementing that.
Well, first of all, I mean, I came into this in a way, I also had my own private epiphany, because I'd been very involved in the environmental movement in different ways for many, many years. And of course, Polly Higgins crossed my path, not surprisingly. And when I met her, you know, I was very, very inspired by her personality, by her personal charisma, her integrity, her beauty. And I was also deeply moved by what she was doing, because for me, you know, I mean, we're going back now, what, in my particular personal terms, 5, 6 years when I first met her. I thought it was just about the most important thing that anybody could possibly be doing. And of course, now we know that it is the critical, vital thing that we need, you know, to change the kind of paradigm of what's happening in our economic system. So anyway, when I met her, I was impressed, and I knew I wanted to do something to help, as you do. You know, I think a lot of us, we meet somebody in our lives or something that is a key moment. I mean, Polly herself, she always talked about a critical choice point, which many of us can encounter. And you have two options. Either you can turn away and stay safe, which of course was not her choice, as we know, as JoJo's described, or you can step up and actually, you know, leave behind more or less the whole shooting match of what you've been busy with for the last 20 years of your life, because you just know this is right. You just know you're going to do it. Well, I was in a very privileged position that I could do it, you know, because my kids had grown up and economically I could volunteer. And so that's what I did. So I just wrote to Polly. I didn't think I'd ever hear back, because, you know, people who are kind of on the global stage as celebrities of one kind or another, they rarely answer. But she did. She answered in 2 days and she said, come. And so that was the beginning of me moving up here and being with her and being with JoJo. And so I think probably the initial years that I was with her, because JoJo and Polly worked very, very closely. And I would come into the base, which is our office, and I would see the two of them with their laptops, almost head to head, almost nose to nose, in a total kind of energy bubble of focus and concentration and, you know, total commitment and involvement. And so I would skirt around the outside and I would do what I could, you know. I would do what I could to look after them in very simple terms, like making food, sometimes hoovering the floor. And that was fine, you know, because if I'd come to serve the earth, then actually get on with it. You know, don't come in with any high-flying ideas that I'm going to be important. I mean, I'm not a lawyer, never will be, but obviously I have my skills. So along the way, in answer to your question, I just found what I could do to help. And I think often that's what all of us need to do. We just need to find our way to help. And there is always a way to do that.
Absolutely, Anita. I understand that very much. I've had pivotal moments in my own life, and several of them actually. I don't think we always just have one, although there's usually one that stands out. And a number of years ago, I lost a brother to suicide, and then 3 years later to the day, I lost a son to suicide. They were pivotal moments in my life, and although the grief was very real, I could give way to that grief, or I could stand up and make a difference, because I could see that our society was letting our young people down. It was letting our earth down. It was letting us all of humanity, but not just humanity, every sentient being. And I think of a tree and a plant as a sentient being as well. So to me, all life is precious and all life deserves protection. All life deserves care and respect. And that's why when I saw your Stop Ecocide, it just immediately, you know, there was a pop. And if I can step up in the work that I do and support those who are supporting life on our beautiful planet, and to each and every sentient being, you know, whether that be a sprout, a tree, or a human being, or any living creature, then that's worth our energy, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
So where have you found your niche now, Anita, with the Stop
Yeah, right.
Ecocide
Well,
movement?
I mean, the Stop Ecocide campaign, as Jojo mentioned, there are the three aspects to this. There's the legal and diplomatic outreach and involvement with the small island Pacific states and so on, and the seeking to bring in the amendment into the ICC. So then the other aspect is the Stop Ecocide campaign. So that's Stop Ecocide, Change the Law. And that is very much outreach to anybody everywhere to A, become aware, B, understand, and C, commit to supporting this campaign. And the idea of that is, which Polly and Jojo worked out, I mean, Polly always knew that anything in life needs cash, you know, anything you're going to do, let alone something like this, so important and so large scale, is going to need financing. And she knew that, you know, the corporations are never going to finance seeking a law which actually would remove most of the source of their industrial profit. So that wasn't going to happen. And so her idea was that, okay, why don't we have a trust, you know, that actually what you can do, you can become a trustee of the earth. So you hold the earth as something, you hold the earth in trust. You're a custodian, you're a guardian. And so therefore they evolved, Jojo and Polly, the term earth protector, which is...
I saw that on the website. So
yeah,
you put out that anyone can become an earth protector. And is that through donation? How does that work? Because I'm sure there are many people out there that would like to become earth protectors.
Yeah, well, that's why I introduced the idea of finance, you know, of contribution, because although it would be great to do it for nothing, but unfortunately that's not how the world works. And obviously the legal expertise, you can imagine, and everything that's involved has to be financed. And so every single person who wishes, who wants to step up and be a trustee of the earth, they donate to a trust fund, which is legally ring-fenced. It can't be used for Jojo and I to go and have a cup of coffee. It is only used to finance that campaign, in particular the legal expertise and the outreach of everything that is required with regard to the small island states, working with the ICC, etc. So that is very secure, and the whole thing is very transparent. People can contribute, they can donate, they can gift. That's the word that Polly would have preferred. She was always talking about gifting. You know, she said, if it makes your heart sing, gift. That was one of her favorite expressions. And yeah, when I first met her, she made my heart sing and I gifted. So, you know, anybody can do that. It doesn't have to be a great amount. Of course, it's better for the campaign, you know, if people will dig deeper into their pocket, but some people simply can't. And so there is a basic minimum of, in terms of Britain, £5, or in terms of Europe, €5, because we want to make it accessible. But, you know, the money is one thing, because yes, it finances, but also what is equally important is what Polly always called a green safety net, like a green firewall. Because you can imagine for those small island states to step up in the International Criminal Court and propose an amendment which is actually going to change the whole economic industrial model and really, really putting corporations on the front foot. Get your act together, otherwise you're going to be prosecuted. I mean, that is quite scary, and it takes a lot of courage. And so when they know that there are thousands and thousands of earth protectors all over the world, passionately involved in A, supporting financially, and B, supporting by getting out there in festivals, by talking, by giving presentations, by having stands, by all the things you do, you know, when you're an active volunteer, then that must be hugely reassuring for them. And that provides the green firewall, you know, because presumably the corporations or the people who are heavily invested in ecocide will look at us and they'll say, okay, so many earth protectors, we'd better watch our step.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, there's always numbers speak loudly. And I mean, if you have 1 million people giving £5, there's £5 million for the cause. So yeah. I think, you know, I've always believed in the power of small things. And, you know, that one drip, if it continues, will hollow out
Yeah,
stone.
and it's
You know,
funny.
or create a stalactite or a stalagmite. So you know, this power of small is something very special.
Yeah, and it's great you actually say that 1 million earth protector, Soraya, because a couple of days before Polly passed, when she was still able to speak, she had 2 wishes, and one of those wishes was 1 million earth protectors.
Oh, well, let's go for that then, shall we? Let's get this
For sure.
podcast out, and I'll do everything I can in my power
Fantastic.
to share this in Australia, because I had never heard of the Stop Ecocide campaign until I came to Stroud last year, and I kept seeing, and I love your symbol, by the way. It's the upside down peace sign, which of course we're a bit upside down in the world at the moment, aren't we? Although we're being brought to our knees right now with the change that is upon us, and I think that this change will bring perhaps in a new paradigm as our old one may break down. And as I'm recording this interview, we're all very aware that we're all self-isolating at the moment. You guys in the UK and me in Australia, and staying home to stay safe and to keep our loved ones and the greater community safe as well. So I don't expect you to speak to it, but I do believe there is a breakdown of the old global way of business, of the monetary systems. I feel that everything is going to perhaps crumble now, so that something new can come out of it, a little bit like the phoenix from the ashes, perhaps. And I might turn to George and ask him if he wants to speak to that. Intuitively, I feel that. So I'll just mute you now, Anita, and unmute George. So George, can you speak a little bit about perhaps what's happening globally right now? Like myself, I think you're a bit of a philosopher, so let's share a little philosophy behind the scenes or over the scene.
Well, I think just to take it from what you mentioned, there is a breakdown of things, and you know, when I first got involved with the Stop Ecocide campaign, I was given the task of looking at the global strategy of the campaign, which in my mind is a local thing. So we're looking at how to integrate and bridge the grassroots local activity with the international activity of changing the law, bringing 2 aspects together, 3 aspects really, in order to change the world. Funny enough, the world is changing because of the virus, and this is something that we kind of course, didn't predict like anybody else, but we did see that the change was going to come from the law of ecocide. And one of our initial thoughts was, how do we make this transition? How do we move from a situation where we are now, where communities are self-destruct, you know, our behavioral patterns are self-destructive, to a place of harmony with the earth. And that transition is something that needs to happen. Nothing happens like from one day to the next. So immediately we kind of started focusing on community resilience, regenerative community, and changing things on the ground. I think, you know, what's happening now is we have a global situation which is breaking down all thought patterns, and it's releasing the space, it's opening up the space for people to start thinking about what is essential. It's also, in a strange way, although we're all self-isolated, it's breaking down our individual egos.
I think that's a really important point, actually. I'll just stop you there for a moment because I'll jump on that one. I think that is an important point. And something else which ties in with what you're saying is, you know, last year we had this young girl, Greta Thunberg from Sweden, traveling around the world, sort of saying, we need to stop flying, we need to, you know, cut down our emissions, we need to think about what we're doing to the planet. And here we are, this tiny little virus came along and boom, the planes have stopped. Boom, our petrochemical, you know, output and emissions have, you know, dropped exponentially, and they're seeing clear skies in China where they haven't seen them for years, and dolphins, I believe, in rivers that haven't had dolphins for years. And so from that point of view, it's the timing, I just, you know, divine timing of the universe is just incredible. But the other point that I love that you made there, and we can expand on that, is the breaking down of individual egos. And rather than the focus on the individual ego, is to focus on the whole. Here we are as humanity now, thinking of our communities and self-isolating to keep our communities safe. And in that self-isolation, being forced to stop. And to stop that frenetic activity.
I think this gap, which is part of the mystical process, if you like, of a person reaching the point where they become aware of what's around and our place in everything else, and the fact that we are nothing, but we are everything at the same time. That stopping of everything gives this opportunity. And my hope is that this opportunity is going to be taken. This is an amazing potential for humanity to make a huge leap here, and to move into the space of altruism, and to move into the space of consciousness about the planet, which of course is driven by a vision of something that is sacred, holy, holistic, in harmony with life itself. And this is why I want to go back to one of Pauli's principles, which is first do no harm. I think, you know, if we start looking at the higher moral grouping of codes that we live by, we know that there's one missing that has to do with our relationship with the earth. And changing that is not only absolutely necessary, but it's also entirely inevitable. We can't have a society that doesn't have a moral codes that protects the earth and communities that protect the earth as part of the picture. So whatever picture you look at out of your window, which could be different and will be different in Australia than it is in the UK, it has to include certain moral principles that guide us. And one of them has to be that there is law about ecocide that protects the earth. And the other one is that every community needs to step up and protect the earth and design itself in such a way that that becomes a central focus.
I think that's a brilliant idea. And I think of consciousness as one thing and life as one thing going on here. I think it's just a whole. And then, of course, because we are living in the world of duality, there is multiplicity and diversity within that one consciousness, expressing as us four in this room, for instance. However, there is that one thread of consciousness that actually makes us one. So living with ahimsa, living ahimsa, which is what Gandhi lived by, which is do no harm, is something that is not just for the individual, not just for humanity, but it's all inclusive of life itself, that one consciousness that is everything going on here. And I think in this sort of dog eat dog business world that's become this paradigm of modern living, where everyone wants to be you know, a megastar or a superstar or the one, and they're set against each other, and we're not lifting each other up together. You know, one wants to rise up, and then we have that tall poppy syndrome where everyone else wants to cut them down, and rather than holding each other, which with Polly's principle of do no harm, which as a yoga teacher myself, that's one of our first principles, is do no harm. Yeah. So, George, can you explain to us your role in the Stop Ecocide campaign?
Well, as I said, I was given the role of, because I like looking at the bigger picture, of looking at the global campaign strategy,
Okay,
which became the local to global campaign strategy, and the birth of another one of Polly's dreams, which was to see Stroud become the first Earth Protector town. So we moved into creating the concept of Earth Protecting Town, and working, co-creating it with the town council and all the different organizations in Stroud, of which there are many, and moving into the space of how do we actually do this to create a community that's regenerative and moves us from a consumer person to kind of a global citizenship. So we started working on a global model so that it has applicability to any kind of community all over the world. And we started working on a pilot program specifically in Stroud of, okay, how do we take these lessons of the process of getting these people together from different organizations with their own egos, their own organizational structures and differences, to work together to move into the future. So I suppose my work is more focused on this local grassroots initiative rather than.
But that might become like a satellite for the rest of the world, you know, like if you can achieve that there, then that makes that achievable, doesn't it, for other communities all over the world. And actually, I was talking to my daughter-in-law, Rachel Oldfield, the other day, and she was telling me the other night in Stroud, everyone shone their torches out the window in the dark together, just as a symbol of solidarity of the community while you're all self-isolating. And it was really touching, really beautiful that many people could, you know. I think sometimes, and it's been my experience in the most challenging times in our life, when we really are challenged and life itself is challenged, it can often bring us all closer together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so this work continues in spite of everything. With modern technology, we're still getting together. Of course, most efforts are now in terms of providing resilience for the community, helping those that are, you know, more vulnerable. And thankfully, we got together before all this happened. So there is some kind of structure behind all this. And Stroud is acting as one in many ways, complementary ways.
And do you have some particular points, George, that you're putting in place for the Stop Ecocide campaign in the community? Like, do you have a prioritized list of things that you're aiming to achieving in the community?
Well, we're creating a set of guidelines. We started with getting a declaration, working on a declaration together with the town council. So the first thing they did was make this declaration, which commits them to protecting the people, the natural, you know, the air, the water, the land. It commits them to supporting the Stop Ecocide campaign to change the law, and also to divest from fossil fuels and, you know, reduce plastics and everything else. But we've also worked on different areas of that, knowing that there are big organizations like Transition Stroud, Transition Movement, and many other organizations locally that are working on specific things. And we identified the gaps, so we formed teams around health and well-being, education and business, and try to bring you know, try to discover what an Earth Protector town would mean for those specific sectors. So we have teams working on that and trying to come up with guidelines and a model approach for schools, for businesses, for health institutions and organizations, by which they can all work together and co-create a new situation. Because again, has to be something that works for each particular place. So we're focusing on a process rather than the results, because the results are going to be different in every different, you know, landscape and different economy. But the process is very similar, of getting people together and finding out what needs to be done, and modeling this, creating some aims, and moving towards connecting that with a global situation.
Well, it's all very exciting, and I really look forward to next time I visit Stroud, seeing how that's playing out and spreading across the community. Every year I go over and I spend time in Stroud in Gloucestershire, and we have family there. So I feel that it's a very there's a lot of forward thinkers there, which is absolutely great. And of course, you three are examples of that. So yeah, that's really, really exciting that you may become leading the way for other communities across the world. I might just turn back to JoJo now. Oh, hold on. Anita's holding something up. We have to find out about that. Anita, I'll just unmute you. What have you got there, Anita?
Yeah, I'm just showing you, this is one of the brochures. We have 3 of these. So we have how to become an Earth Protector town. Then we have how to become an Earth Protector school. And this is our latest one, how to become an Earth Protector university. And so these are the guidelines. On the back, you have how to become an Earth Protector, you know, in view of what we talked about, stop ecocide, change the law. And then inside there are guidelines, because, you know, this is not prescriptive. It is really collaborative, and it's kind of working it out together. And actually what I'm in the process of doing is forming, especially now when people are, you know, isolated and can't go into uni, I've got a small team of different university students from about 5 different unis, LSE in London, SOAS in London, Exeter, Bournemouth, and anyway, it doesn't matter. And what we're doing, we're coming together with one student, and on Zoom, we're going to work out, you know, okay, how would this work in my university? How can we take this forward? Once we get back and the wheels start turning, hopefully not as normal, not business as usual, but, you know, in this preferred, improved way that we're all hoping and yearning for, then how do we actually take that into each campus? And I find that quite a good little space right now to evolve that by talking to students who are in the unis. How would you do it? You know, so bringing the young people into the experiment. So
that's what we actually need is, we've got amazing young people coming along now. Actually, my youngest son is 19, and he's enrolled and doing environmental science. So he'd probably be quite interested in that himself.
Where is he, Soraya?
Where is he? He's in the cottage in the garden.
Okay, so he's not in uni and not in this country yet.
Not in the UK, but you know, you need satellites. You need unis all over the world involved in this, don't you?
Ask him. Ask him if he wants to get involved with my team.
Okay, I will.
Yeah, perfect.
That's fabulous. And I feel like, you know, we're that older, well, perhaps not JoJo, but with the others of us here, we're that older generation, and we need the young ones to carry this forward. They've got the energy, and there's some amazing young people coming along now who are, you know, going to be incredibly highly educated, and they're yearning for that new world. They know if they don't get it in their lifetime, their children won't be surviving or definitely not thriving anyway. So no, that's fabulous. Thank you for sharing. JoJo, I'd really like to just ask you, obviously, you know, the big aim that you guys have here is to get the law changed, because once we have that law changed, then we can actually it becomes a criminal act. Ecocide becomes a criminal act, and then we can really stop it. I mean, in Australia here, it is so frustrating. I mean, we've had fracking going on, and people out west, you know, on massive big properties, losing their land because their water, which is incredibly precious in Australia, because we have so much desert area and so many droughts here, and they've had their water become absolutely undrinkable for their stock, for their vegetables and for their crops. We've also had, you know, coal mining wanting to go ahead, and lots and lots of protests against that, but the government just is still not listening. So I'm all for changing the law. So whereabouts are you with that? And do you actually have within your organization, do you have any lawyers on your side?
Yeah, very much so. We work closely with a couple of law firms particularly, but also, I mean, I kind of want to come back to what you were saying about, you know, when this law is in place, things will actually change. I would actually say that the change actually comes earlier than that, because I mean, if we were to bring in this law tomorrow, it would actually be quite chaotic, because you'd have, I mean, politicians really wouldn't know where to put themselves, particularly in countries like Australia, like the UK, like the US, where the governments are really strongly hand in glove with industry. You know, it would be very difficult, you know, the courts wouldn't be able to cope and so on. But the important thing is that when this law becomes visible, which is already starting to happen because the global conversation around it is changing, you're already going to start to see corporations start to behave differently, because the whole concept of making damage to nature criminal puts it, you know, it kind of shifts the whole conversation around what's acceptable and not acceptable, because in our current kind of first world culture, we associate you know, criminal law is our kind of moral red line. So, you know, a corporation, you know, can't, certainly not publicly, build its business on killing people, because killing people is a crime. It's not lawful. But at the moment, it still can build a business on damaging the environment, because that hasn't yet been set below that red line. And just the fact that people are discussing it at a government level of actually calling for that to be a crime is already starting to shift the conversation. And say, I mean, we're already seeing, you know, particular big banks withdrawing from particular projects. I mean, it's by no means, you know, a full and final solution in any way, in a good sense, but it's showing that things are starting to change. And once that proposal is actually on the table to actually, you know, to actually propose, we want the law amended in this way, it becomes something that's visible, it becomes something that's approaching, and corporations can start to look at changing their practices, because this is not, there is something different about ecocide as a crime as compared to other, what we think of as atrocity crimes, like genocide, for example, or war crimes, which are currently listed at the ICC, the International Criminal Court, because someone who's committing genocide probably doesn't care all that much about what people think of them. You know, they're going to do that anyway. Now, it's very different with corporations committing ecocide, because corporations depend absolutely on public confidence. They depend on, you know, the value of their shares and so on. And of course, they don't want to be in that same bracket with a war criminal or a genocidal maniac. You know, that is not where, you know, your CEO, even of the biggest companies, wants to be. And so just the fact that that law is approaching will start to change that landscape. And I mean, you know, a small example, I mean, in Europe, we had this bringing in of data protection laws. And, you know, we could see that coming. You know, every company was like, well, we're all going to have to comply with this within this certain time frame. And so what we're aiming for is for something similar to happen with ecocide, that once it becomes visible, it becomes, you know, and it's approaching, because we do believe that a law like this will have to come into place at some point if we are to survive and thrive on this planet at all. So what we're really doing is trying to accelerate that point and make it visible so that we can take everybody with us, you know, because we're not in, you know, what we're not trying to do is demonize, you know, anybody specifically, although having come from an activist background myself, you know, I can see that's very appealing. You know, people often say, who would you like to see in the dock? You know, who's the first CEO that you want to see go down for this? You know, and actually my answer to that is I'm hoping that by, you know, what we want is that by the time that law comes in, those practices have already changed, and we actually have a minimal number of prosecutions because people are actually behaving differently. So there's, you know, there's a kind of overall kind of trajectory, if you like, that has power in and of itself.
So
and
they see
that's
what's
something
coming. They see that, you know, that this is what's coming, that the laws are going to change, that you know, you guys are serious, that this is going ahead. Then once they see that's on the table, they're going to start changing their ways, changing their policies, because they need the money of the public to support them. They need people that are going to buy their shares.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And also I would say that in a way it doesn't, you know, at the moment we're the only sort of NGO in the world that is exclusively focused on this one thing, making ecocide a crime. And yet at the same time, you know, what's actually happening and what for us is a measure of success is the way that the global conversation is changing, and people don't necessarily associate it with us, but it, you know, but you know, we might know that, you know, behind the scenes, all that work that Polly did, you know, over the years of raising that and really insisting on that concept is now paying off, in that concept is now planted and is now starting to be talked about by people who've never heard of Polly and who've never heard of us. That it's starting to sort of move forward, you know, in a sense. There's a sense of it's, you know, what you and George were talking about, you know, we wanting to move to, you know, a livable world, a world that's thriving. You know, there's been this talk of sustainability for years, but you know, what is it we're trying to sustain? I mean, Polly used to talk about this. She used to say, you know, I hate the word sustainable. She said, if somebody said to you, how's your relationship? And you said it's sustainable, you know, that would not be a measure of success. You know, you want something to be thriving. You don't just want it to be sustainable. And I sort of feel like, you know, as I think as George was saying as well, there's a kind of contextualization that is happening because of the coronavirus situation, which is quite interesting for those of us in the West or the global North, because, you know, we're having to, you know, we're fearing for our loved ones, we're worrying about whether things will run out and we won't have, you know, access to, you know, what we feel we need. Now, actually, those situations are situations that those in the global South have been experiencing for decades or more, you know, because of the way that we continue with this, you know, unsustainable culture that we've built up around ourselves. And so
and I wonder how all the as well, the refugees. I mean, there's these massive refugee camps where people are just living in tents. There's been no mention of them on the news here whatsoever. And and in Australia, we're in the same point. You know, it's been a bit of a joke going around. Everyone's bought all the toilet paper. There's no toilet paper left in the aisles, and that's sort of their big problem. Whereas, you know, there's so many people who have become victims to ecocide, who have been going without for a very, very long time, and maybe we're just leveling the playing board here and seeing what the world could. It's not just over there; it will affect us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is it's definitely been a big sort of bringer of perspective, if you like. And you know, but I was struck by the you know, Antonio Guterres, you know, doing as indeed he should as head of the UN, basically saying to, you know, to everybody around the world, look, stop fighting. You know, let's just stop the whole conflict thing completely, because actually there's bigger picture going on here. And there's something about, you know, there's a kind of call to grow up for humanity, you know, to kind of, you know, and that's not, you know, I don't intend to trivialize people's feelings about the conflicts that they're in, but, you know, but there is this sense that, you know, we actually pull out and look at, you know, how interconnected we all are, you know, with nature, with each other, how much we depend on each other and how much we depend on the system, the ecosystems around us, that it's kind of forcing us, I hope, into a systemic thinking, into a way of thinking in terms of ecosystems in the broadest possible sense.
It's like letting go of narcissism, you know. I mean, there's been this the world has become narcissistic, you know, and now it's time to become holistic and think of humanity as one whole rather than it's all about me.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's interesting as well. I mean, it's great to have this aspect to the work, which is what George is kind of leading in a way, the whole kind of initializing and seeding a network that can grow around the world in terms of protected communities, towns, schools, businesses, and so on. Because I mean, I've been asked a couple of times in interviews, you know, well, how do corporations, you know, how would corporations approach this? You know, where are the models for actually how to deal with things differently? And it's great to be able to say, well, actually, you know, this is something we're actually experimenting with ourselves and looking at how that can work, so that there are, you know, directions that people can move in, so that it doesn't just feel like oh my God, this is a brick wall, I now can't do this anymore.
And there's a grassroots model. There's a grassroots model that's grounded, that's practical, that's been trialed, that's actually you're working it out in Stroud, so that people can look at that and go, hopefully, okay, they've done this, they've achieved this, and if they can do it, you know, our community can do it too.
And I think the other thing I wanted to come back also as well, regarding what Anita was saying about the green firewall, as Polly used to call it, it's very much about civil support and civil mobilization. Now, we've already seen over the course of the last year, as a result of Greta and the Fridays for Future, also Extinction Rebellion, you know, these kind of climate mobilizations and you know, the wake up to climate and ecological emergency has made a huge difference to how people can hear what we're saying. I mean, we had a consultant who worked with us for many years who had a conversation with a lawyer from the Environment Agency in the UK who got very excited about the concept of ecocide and said, well, you know, why haven't you talked to me about this before? And he just looked at her and said, I have. We're now in a situation where people's, you know, the window of what people can hear and what people are prepared to look at is growing very fast. And, you know, there's a kind of acceleration going on where, you know, we're not able to predict, you know, from, you know, 2 months to the next 2 months what the global situation, you know, is going to be. And that's both very unnerving, but it is also exciting in the sense that when there's great change in this way, you know, there is potentially, you know, there are the opportunities to make things possible that have not seemed possible before. And one of the aspects that for us is very important in terms of, you know, getting civil support for this across the world, and it is looking at when you're looking at changing something like this at the internet, become more politically appealing, because we've already seen that some countries have tried to bring this in at the national level. France, for example, discussed in its parliament, discussed ecocide twice last year, but rejected it at both times. And I can kind of understand that from a political perspective. It feels very risky for one jurisdiction to go out on this limb and to say we're now disallowing these things, when it will feel like it will put them at a competitive disadvantage and all of that you know, those kinds of problems. Whereas if something is moving at an international level, you know, apart from anything else, in order to pass something at the international criminal law level, you need to have a certain number of countries moving with you. So there's this kind of safety in numbers thing. And that also means that the more people are talking about it at the grassroots level in the more countries, the more that demand is going to be visible to their governments. But also, you know, governments then have the political lower risk of moving with other countries. They're not sticking their necks out on a limb, so to speak. But also they can then be seen as leaders in that space. You know, so anyone who does move on this, you know, they have the safety of knowing that when this moves forward, it will move forward with a lot of countries, not just one, and therefore they're not going to be putting themselves at a massive disadvantage. But at the same time, if they are first movers on it, they get to be the heroes. You know, they get to say, you know, we're leading on this. So, you know, there are a lot of advantages to doing that. And of course, you know, when something like this is put in place internationally, the other thing is that, you know, I suppose in a way what I'd like to do here is just draw a bit of a difference between the many environmental agreements that exist in the world, the most, obviously the biggest and best known being the Paris Agreement,
Yeah.
All, many of which they're not enforceable ones, which is why it's one of the reasons it simply hasn't worked up till now. Whereas if you're going in at this sort of criminal level, you're immediately accessing criminal justice systems that already exist in all of those countries. So you're not having to create new courts, you're not having to create new ways of obliging people. If something becomes a crime, then your own police force can deal with it. Everybody has a police force, everybody has a criminal justice system. So there's this way that if that can be kind of understood at an awareness level of kind of raising awareness, look, making this a crime at the international level means that everybody's criminal justice system can apply itself to this. That's actually the potential, having the potential of that understood, I think, is really important. And kind of, again, sort of coming back to civil awareness being a key ingredient in this, because it actually it enables people to say to their governments, this is what we want to see you leading on, this is what we want to see you joining in with.
It's very exciting, isn't it, that and I totally get it, that there's power in solidarity, there's power in countries coming together, there's power in standing together. And because, as you're saying, because the criminal courts, they're already set up. It's not a new setup. It's just a new law that will be able to be clearly enforced in each country that accepts it. So, and the protection that it will offer will be absolutely incredible for the planet. And I think, sustainability aside, if we're going to thrive as a planet, if we're going to see our great grandchildren, then this really needs to happen. And there's been so many amazing people in our lifetime. One that springs to mind is David Attenborough, and he's been a voice of late as well, standing up for the earth and standing up for taking care of the earth. And what you guys are doing, what Greta has done, and there's, here we call, we're often called the greenies, and there's a little bit of denigration put on the greenies, which is very sad, because what the greenies actually stand for is taking care and being good custodians of the earth that we walk on, and that sustains us with life and allows us to thrive and express and be humanity. So this work is absolutely so important. So on a last note, and I'll open this, just whoever would like to answer it. I know that you're working globally, but you're also working locally with the very important grassroots work that George is doing in Stroud in the UK. But to the people of Australia, to the people of other countries, to the people who perhaps have not heard of the Stop Ecocide campaign, what is your message to them? What role can they play in supporting this very good work? And who would like to answer that?
Anita?
Well, I would state the obvious. I mean, there are several aspects to this, but the obvious is, as an individual, sign up to be an earth protector, put your weight behind it, put what you can in the ring-fenced pot, and know that you are helping this law progress to the point that it will become statutory and we can change our world in the way we all yearn for, to protect the earth. That would be the first thing. The second thing is, as an individual, speak to everyone you can about this. I mean, my kids, they used to go mad with me. They said, oh, Mom, can't you speak about something else? But Polly spoke about seeding. I remember when I first came to Polly, so many people said, because we all felt helpless, and possibly we still do, but she's given us, along with JoJo, the perfect opportunity to get out of that helplessness and do something. And Polly always used to say, seed it out. I mean, the simple law of a garden, if you want flowers, you've got to seed them. If you want vegetables, you have to seed them. Otherwise, harvest, zero. So seed, and by seeding, talk. communicate, speak to others, you know, get your family to sign up as earth protectors, get the whole of your street to sign up as earth protectors. I don't care, just bring them all in. You know, this is that important. We need to do this. So that would be my first message.
Okay, well, I'm going to sign up as an earth protector, and I'm going to be planting lots of seeds.
Good.
Here, I live on a hectare of land here and caretake this land for the earth. I've been reforesting it, and today my 19-year-old son, who's studying environmental science, and I built another vegetable bed. I've got lots of seeds and seedlings to plant in that, so that if we really have to hunker down here, we can grow our own food, and we harvest our own bananas and star fruit, and we've got citrus on and all sorts of things. And I would love to see the day when everyone can go out and pluck a piece of fruit from a tree and eat that chemical free. So I'm all for seeding this, and I have to say thank you to each one of you, and thank you for the work that you do for all of us, for our children and for our grandchildren, and for the sustainability, and not just the sustainability, but the thriving of our Mother Earth. And I hope and pray that this law will come about in our lifetime, and that more and more people become earth protectors. Every day I'm out there weeding because I refuse to use pesticides on my property. And when you're in the tropics, there's a lot of weeds. But we're weeding here out those also who are not taking care of this wonderful earth, aren't we? We're making it so that they cannot do harm, that we are all taking that responsible act of loving and living in a loving way towards not only humanity, but to all sentient beings and to the earth herself. So I thank you very, very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having us on, and go to our website, stopecocide.earth.
I'll have your website down on the blog below this, or if it's on the video on YouTube, you'll be able to see it across the screen now. So thank you very much, guys. Join me for upcoming podcasts. And please, if you found this helpful, or you'd like to share a comment, or perhaps your own experience, I'd love for you to leave that message down below this podcast. I enjoy reading your feedback, and I'm sure we can all help each other to hold hands, to remain awake, present, clear, and loving. Namaste.